Hello, welcome back for another Sunday unknown palm reading. So last week I was looking at this hand here, and I surmised this man was I felt like a military man or a policeman, police officer was a good fit for this person. I also felt like actually an athlete might be a better fit for this person. I think they were or have at some point been involved in sports. And what else? I also mentioned that early on in the life there was a lack of guidance. I mentioned that it was possibly ended up in a foster home. So I discovered a few things about this person afterwards. So I was right in terms of him being a military man. He was a soldier, suffered some mild PTSD. I didn't pick up on that. So there's a lesson to be learned there. And he was also an athlete. Amazingly, I was right about two of those things. So I'm really surprised about that. But what I didn't pick up on was, as I've said, suffered from some mild PTSD. And I also didn't pick up on here, if you look at in between the index finger and the middle finger, so that's Jupiter and Saturn, you notice quite a big gap here. And I did pick up on, these two fingers being quite close together and this finger leaning away. But I didn't pick up on this. Now, anyone with a bit of a gap in between the first two fingers has at some point, some way, had an absent father. So I learned afterwards that he had an estranged relationship with his father, and that was the reason for the lack of guidance early on in his childhood. So those are a couple of things I didn't pick up on, but I'm really pleased overall with my analysis, my conclusion there. So yeah, moving on. This week we're going to be looking at a case study. So this was sent to me by Terry, and I'm imagining it's one that he's already examined, and he's got some pointers here. I mean, this isn't a complete guess because first of all, obviously, it's health related. Look at it. Comes from the NHS, comes from the Care Quality Commission rather. And he's already kind of signposted places of points of interest. I've had a good look at this. I've done a bit of homework, so this shouldn't be too difficult. If I get things wrong here, I'm going to kick myself a bit. So, as usual, I'm going to draw up my conclusions based from several signs and symptoms, never from one alone. And then next week, I'm going to reveal how wrong or right I got it. So, check it out. First things first, let's go through number one. Here we've got a girdle of Venus. The girdle of Venus runs from in between the little and ring finger and the first two fingers. So bear with me. Just draw you an example right here. That's a girdle of Venus. Now anyone with a straight line running from in between these two places here, there's nothing wrong with a girdle of Venus. In medieval palmistry, they would say this is associated with the seedy side of life, with perverts and deviants, pimps, prostitutes, drug dealers, this sort of thing. That we don't really, make these kind of snap decisions anymore in palmistry. Like, as I've said, you can't draw a conclusion based on one sign or symptom. And there's nothing actually wrong with a girdle of Venus. All it really means is a healthy desire for the opposite sex. However, if it's doubled or if it's kind of fragmented like this, it's not quite as a healthy desire. It turns into something else, something more like an unhealthy kind of lust, which can sometimes get people into trouble. I just want to mention there's nothing wrong with the way a person feels. It's how we act on those feelings that can sometimes be what's, wrong. So there we are. There's the Girdle of Venus there, and already, as I've said, this is health related, and we've already mentioned sex, so it's already kind of falling into a certain category here. Now, number 2, we've got a Mercury finger. So the 3 phalanges of a finger, I never know if I'm saying that word right. It's a silly word. The 3 segments of a finger goes something like this. You've got your mind, body, and soul. Okay, so I'm just gonna mind, body, and soul. Now notice with this, let's just take another finger, for example. Apollo. That's a terrible example. Right, so Apollo here looks, I don't even need to draw around it. It's a relatively straight finger. It's slightly wider at the bottom. Each of the phalanges are relatively even in length. The middle being the longest. That's kind of average. It's a relatively long Apollo finger, especially in relation to Jupiter. We'll get around to that. But with Mercury here, if you look at the first 2, well, this is the first one. If you look at the first, so body and mind, they're relatively straight, and then when you get to the soul here, it kind of turns inwards towards the rest of the fingers. So if you look at it, it's a lot to unpack here, really, but I'm trying to summarize it, and I'm not doing a very good job here. But Mercury, this is Mercury finger. It's all about learning. It's about calculations, language. Big part of it's communication, because also a big part of it is expression, and they're part of the same thing. 2 sides of a coin, I suppose. The way we express ourselves is multifaceted. We're physical beings. We express ourselves verbally, artistically, physically. A large part of how we communicate is through body language, and the way we use our body language when we communicate. A large degree of it is that. It's huge. I don't know what the number is. But being that we are physical beings, a large part of how we express ourselves is through sex. And a person who has a kind of kink in their soul of the Mercury, if you like, their soul, let's say their soul is a little bit kinky. There we go. I've tried to sum this element up of this person here. Again, there's nothing wrong with that. It's how we act off these feelings, these thoughts and desires and urges that make something okay or not. There's absolutely nothing wrong with if your finger bends in a little bit like this, well, that's fine. As I've said, none of these things mean too much on their own. It's when we start to put them together that it builds a bit of a picture. Also, someone that has a kind of a Mercury finger that bends in at the soul, if you like, is someone who is potentially I don't really know how to put this, but as the finger suggests, it's slightly crooked. So I'm just going to leave it there before I mess up this reading. So let's just take these things into account as we go. Now, Jupiter, this is a really interesting one, and this, if I were to look at this palm in person, not just a printout with some numbers and lines on it, this is probably the first thing I'd notice, because Jupiter is very short in comparison to Apollo, and that's something I think I've sort of trained my brain to look for. So Apollo here is quite long. It's nearly even. Oh, it's nearly even with Saturn. There's not a lot in it, and also the tips are quite rounded. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not helping anything. They're quite rounded. So here we've got a person who thinks in the moment, who feels in the moment, and perhaps he's quite good at that. Let's have a look. Yep, lifeline and the headline are detached. Not massively. I've seen a greater gap there, and again, there's nothing wrong with that. But a person whose lifeline and headline are detached, their life energies are detached from their thoughts. So what they're doing, it's known as the mark of the tiger in Tibetan palmistry. It's someone who acts before they think. This combined with someone with a large Apollo, that's someone who has a much longer ring finger than Jupiter, and where it's reaching, it's not far away from the full length of Saturn there. This is how you determine a long Apollo finger here. So these three things combined, the roundedness, the long Apollo, and the space between the head and the lifeline, these are all signs of a gambler, a bad gambler. Frank Sinatra had all these signs. I know, I've checked his palm out. I thought, oh, he looks like he could potentially be a bad gambler. Well, he was in debt to the mob by allegedly about $50,000, which at the time was obviously a lot of money. Anyway, so I've gone off course a bit here because I'm talking about something that's not actually mentioned or signposted to in this little case study. But I thought that was a relevant mention here because I do think it ties in. This person is willing to take risks in the moment, and enjoys taking risks. It's impulsive, and I think this person needs to perhaps rein in those urges. Probably someone who likes to overtake unnecessarily. This gap is also linked with impatience. So when you've got someone who has these kinds of urges linked with this sort of nature, you've got a bit of a cocktail for peril here. So moving on, Jupiter is very short. How do we determine that? Well, if you look at Saturn, the first phalange of Saturn, Jupiter doesn't quite make it to halfway. This is how we determine what is a short Jupiter. Now, Jupiter is authority, decision-making, judgment, ego, and ambition. And when someone has a stunted Jupiter finger, such as this, and it's not quite as rounded as Apollo and Saturn, it's a bit sort of flatter. This is certainly a stunted Jupiter. It's just someone with low self-esteem, someone with low confidence, and often someone with these qualities, along with other things I've mentioned here, is someone who overcompensates compensates for this low self-esteem, this low confidence, low self-worth with sex, drugs, and womanizing. It's about escapism, because although this person might genuinely work very hard and actually be quite successful, potentially, it doesn't really sort of matter. I see this a lot with A-list celebrities. They often have, even though they're incredibly successful, they have a short Jupiter, and they because they don't feel, even though everybody else looks at them as success, it's about how you feel as a person, and how what you deem as success it's relevant to the individual. So again, we have someone here who has slightly more potential for womanizing. This is all falling into a sexual health palm reading. That's the theme here. So here we are, number 4. Maybe that's what this is pointing out, the gap between these two. But something else I picked up on here was this line here. So I can't remember what this line is called, but it's not a good sign. It's not a good marking. So we've got a line here that starts at the life. It cuts through the head, through the heart line, and touches onto Mercury. Again, this place of learning, communication, and expression. So this is, I'm just going to have to sum it up because I'm not incredibly clued up with this particular marking, but it's peril and it's disease, it's misfortune. A person with a line like this really, needs to be careful in matters of their health, because their actions in their life affects all areas of their body as it crosses over the mind, the heart line, and then the health line. So it's almost as though this is a person who is, as far as the hand is saying at the moment, a little bit looks sort of destined really to fail in a particular department. So as I mentioned, disease, I think this person has picked up sexually transmitted disease. Now, I just want to make a quick mention here. Lines change all the time. If you're looking at your palm and you're seeing a lot of these things here, well, don't worry, okay, because, the lines tell us, our palm tells us, this is what's going to happen if you keep going down this path. If you make great changes, your palm will very quickly also show these changes. You have to first change the way you think and you feel and your routines and your diets and habits. Then these lines will also start showing a change, because the way you're acting and behaving in the present changes, so the future potential, future possibilities change. So the lines really show you some things are set in stone in the past and the present, but some things, in terms of divination, it's a view down the road, and not all of it is set in stone. So I don't want anyone to worry too much here. This is unfortunately quite a negative reading. I can't help that. I'm sorry. So moving on, number 5, we've got here a headline that, look at it. And there's nothing wrong with a gentle curve of a headline, but this is someone who is, this is quite a large lunar mount. A large lunar is someone who's, it's quite a negative person, I think, because there's such an expanse of imagination. It's like they overthink. They're too much in their minds, and someone who is too much in thought is not grounded, is not in the present, is not going to be grounded is the best word, really. And especially someone with a headline that droops quite sharply down into, this is getting close to Neptune, let alone lunar. This is certainly someone who fantasizes and is actually a bit of a fantasist, lives in a bit of a dream world. Also, the headline forks, that's not a bad thing, but it can be. There's a pro and a con to everything, I suppose, in palmistry. A headline that forks is someone who, so on the plus side, it's someone who can put themselves into other people's shoes, view things through others' perspectives. That's not something that everyone can do. You often find writers have this, actors have this, lawyers. It's hugely beneficial in these professions to be able to see things from others' perspectives and to draw on from that imagination. On the other side of it, the more negative side of having a fork in the headline, is that some people with this have the unfortunate ability to lie, and it's sometimes, I don't think it's I don't think they mean to. I think it just sort of happens, and then they kind of sometimes also perhaps believe that lie, especially if they're living in a bit of a fantasy. So people with a forked headline do have a tendency to lie. That's not to say that people with this are liars. However, people with a more crooked Mercury could be have more of a tendency to be untruthful and potentially unfaithful. But anyway, moving on. Number 6 here, we've got a square at the bottom of the lifeline. This is interesting. I mean, look at this. That's such a solid square. What structural integrity? Look at it, and that is an excellent sign. All squares on the palm are good. There could never be a bad thing in palmistry. However, the need for a square is protection. This is what this means. It's protecting something. It's boxing something off. So that's a good thing. But the need for it to be there isn't. The reason why it's there in the first place isn't necessarily a good thing. It's connected. It's joined onto the lifeline here, and it's definitely connected to the Mercury line, the health line. The health line in itself is not a particularly healthy health line, so to speak, because it's quite wavy. There are some difficulties, there are some problems. He's probably been on and off, courses of medication for various things. So I think this is someone who has been quite careless in certain respects of his life. He's succumbed to certain urges, and as a result, he's transmitted some sexually transmitted disease. He's contracted some of those. So there we are then. I mean, also he's got a very large Venus, very large lunar. So I mean, as I say, these aren't necessarily bad things. He doesn't have the kind of heartline I would expect to see from all the other symbols. I'd expect to see someone whose curves, a sharp curve. I don't see that here, although perhaps the Girdle of Venus is taking over in that respect, because you've got the arc there, and it's certainly tied in with this whole region, the health line there. So there we go. I'm in danger of rambling now. Right. So that's my conclusion for this case study. So I'm going to ask Terry. I'm going to email Terry now and send him a link to this video and see what he says. And let's see how right or wrong I got this next week. So thanks for watching. If you, this is something I want to mention. If you would like me to read your palm and use your palm as part of one of these YouTube videos, feel free. Email me. I'll put my email address in the description. I don't need your name. I don't need to know anything about you. Just say, please, use my palm in one of your videos. I'll tell you all about you, and you can let me know if I get it right. So thanks for watching, and join me next Sunday for another exciting installment of Reading an Unknown Palm.